is going to talk about creating code workbook templates in a production environment. So this is a really sort of core functionality that the consortium has developed, and I think it'll be really useful to give the community a nice overview of this. So I think I'm really looking forward, Shawn, to your presentation. And then Ken is going to talk about governance issues for patient preserving record, privacy preserving record linkage. And this has been an item both developing the technical capabilities, but frankly, actually the regulatory and governance part is I think substantially harder. So, and I think there's been a lot of progress on that. And obviously, in order to use this very important linkage, this needs to be understood. And so we have the weekly slide on progress. I guess we have 56 sites have data released into the enclave, 42 sites data deposited, 88 sites have signed data transfer agreements, 211 sites have DUAs executed. So without further ado, Shawn, I think you're next, and you're going to share slides, as I understand it.
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen actually and show a quick demo. Let's hope it works. Live demos. So what I'm going to talk about today are code workbook transforms. This is something that you can use inside of the enclave in a code workbook to sort of reuse code in different workbooks or even across projects and teams. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So if you're not familiar with the enclave, this does require understanding a little bit about code workbooks, which is the screen that I'm showing here. In a code workbook, every node in this sort of interface is either a data set, which you can think of as a table, which has been imported from someplace else in the enclave, or is a transform, which takes one or more tables as input and then spits out a table as output. And here I'm showing one of the OMOP tables from the SynPuff notional data. So this isn't real patient data, this is mock patient data, and the dates are all like back in late 2000s. And it's the condition era table.
Hey, Shawn, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's a little bit small. Is it possible to zoom in at all on your screen?
Like that?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thank you so much.
No problem. And what I've got here is, so when you have a table like this, like a condition era table, every row is associated with some OMOP concept. And that's all of the data, right? That's some 10 million rows, but probably I'm going to want to filter that down to some concept set, like, okay, different kinds of pneumonia, or maybe I just am interested in non-influenza pneumonia. And so I have a transform here, and this is the code for that transform. And what it does is we're just going to browse this code real quick, and then we'll move on to a little bit more interesting stuff. What it does is it reads in the condition era table that I have here, and it also reads in the concept set members table. The concept set members table contains information about the different concept sets that have been defined by people in the enclave. And a particular concept set might actually have different versions. So potentially, someone developed this UVA fracture of bone concept set. The first version that they created contains all of these different concept IDs, which are things that we could find in some, potentially condition era table to match against all the different kinds of fractures of bone or something like this. Rather than sort of editing concept sets directly, the architects of the concept set infrastructure of the enclave decided that it'd be better to simply create a new version of the concept set. So if there's an updated version of this, there'll be some more rows later on where the version is 2 or 3 or whatever. And this particular column here is true when it's the most recent version. So generally, if there's like a version 2 that's created, the version 2 will get this most recent version flag. So I can tell that version 1 is the most recent version of this particular concept set. So this code is doing the work of pulling out the rows from this table that match a particular concept set that's been defined in this table. And the concept set that I've defined that I'm interested in pulling out is non-influenza pneumonia training in brackets. I want to grab out a particular version of it. And just for this code, I'm going to say that the version 0 means latest, right? So there's like version 1, version 2, version 3. I'm just going to have 0 here to use the latest version. And then the other thing to know about the way that concepts work in OMOP tables is that every table has the name of the concepts that are involved. So in this condition table, this column is the column of concept IDs that I want to match against, but it actually contains condition concept ID here. So if I'm working with a different table, like a drug era table, then I'm going to actually want to match it against a different column in this particular table. So over here in this code, I have to tell it, okay, go to the concept set members table, pull out that concept set information. If it's 0, I want the latest one. And then in the other table, match those against the condition concept ID. And that's what the logic down here does, right? So if the version is 0, then I want to match, or I want to filter out from the concept set members the rows where the concept set name is the one that I named up here, and where is most recent version is true. That's if version is 0. Otherwise, I want to match by the name, and I want to grab version according to the version I was specified. And then down below here, I'm just grabbing out the column of concepts from that condition or the concept set member table that I care about. And then I'm joining it against this table to basically say, okay, keep the rows from both tables where the concept ID column in the filtered concept set is equal to the column entries from the condition concept ID. So this code really just implements the matching of those things. And as a preview, I can see that, I filtered it down, and now I've only got pneumonia entries in this filtered version. This is showing the code view of this, but actually I've created a template out of this. And what a template is sort of a chunk of code where you can enter into the code like a form. So you sort of have a form that overlays your code. And in this case, if I wanted to, I could change the input. And so I could load up another table instead of this condition error table, and I could just click on that table to change that to be the input here. Similarly, I could change the concept set members table to be a different concept set members table, although I wouldn't really want to do that because there's only one concept set members table, all the different concepts that live in this one table. So if I want, I can edit this template to sort of show how this form laid on top of code works. What I've got here, and this is a little bit awkward because my screen is a little bit bigger, is that code, instead of having a particular bit of code there, I've wrapped it in this sort of like triple curly bracket syntax. And I've wrapped this one in the triple curly bracket syntax. And each of those curly bracket syntax things gets turned into a parameter over in the template editor view. So for example, I can expand this and say, okay, the OMOP domain table parameter, which is going to correspond to this red curly template thing, should be a data set. That's the input type. I want it to be a Spark data frame, yada, 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 and you can put some description stuff. Similarly, the concept set members table is also a data set, and yada, yada, yada. So you can see how all these parameter things get replaced by the entries that are in these text boxes when I go to do the code view. And that's exactly what I want. We're not done though. I've sort of hard coded several entries. So it'd be nice if I could change the concept set name and the version. And fortunately, I can do that. I can go to the edit template, or actually what I'll do is you could edit the template and sort of change it, but these templates are versioned. And so if I want, I could go to the logic and say action change template version. And I'm going to change this to version 1, which is a later version. And I'm going to say update template to version 1, and we'll see how I change this. Now in the new version of the template, I have some other inputs. I have an input for the concept set name. So rather than having it just sort of hard coded in the code, I can type in whatever I want here. And then if I toggle the view, what I typed goes directly into that string. And then similarly, down here, the concept set version, if I were to change that, it gets changed right there. So I'm going to change that back to 0. And to see how that works, I'm going to go back to the edit template view and edit this particular version of this template. What I see now are I have 2 more curly brackety things. And you'll notice that the first one is in quotes and the second one is not. The first one is the concept set name. And here, rather than having a type of data set, I've said it's a type of variable and that it's going to be inputting text. And you can put in a default value and sort of description, and those are useful. And then similarly, for the version, I have a variable type, but the param type should be a number. And that just limits the form into what I can put in it. And I have a default value and then a description. And the reason that this one is in quotes and this one is in not, it's because whatever I type into that form will get placed into the code sort of verbatim. So if I want it to be a string in R or Python, I have to do my own manual work of putting the quotes around. So anyway, I'm going to cancel that. And now I can see that I have these different inputs that I can change via this form rather than the code view. So I'm going to update this template again because there's still a couple of things that are hard coded. This gave me the concept set name and the concept set version, but I've still got hard coded this condition concept ID. And in order to update that, I'm going to go and I'm going to change my template version again. And in this case, version 2 was a mistake, so I'm going to update to version 3. And now, if I look at my view, because again, if I'm going to work with the condition error table, I have to tell the thing which column it should be finding the matches against. If I'm in the drug error table, then I need a different column to match the concepts against. So what this does is it allows me to choose one of the columns in the input data set. And that happens in the parameter settings. So here, again, I've got my match column name that I'm interested in. And I'm going to put it in quotes because I do want it to be a string in my code. But down here, I'm going to say that the input type is a column rather than a data set, which we saw earlier, or a variable, which we saw earlier. Now I want to say, hey, the user should be able to select a column. And when you have a column input type, you can actually select which of the input data sets that are listed up above that it should be listing the columns from. In this case, I want to select one of the columns that are listed in the OMOP domain table input from up here. If I wanted, I could restrict it to say, oh, they can only choose a date time column or a number column or a text column or something like that. So now I can use this bit of code and this template, and I can select my table sets of interest. I can select my concept set of interest, my version, or leave it at 0. And then I can say, oh, by the way, this is the column that you need to match for that concept set. So if I were sort of developing this, it's coming along pretty well. One of the issues that I have with it is that the inputs are a little bit jumbled. You know, they're not like in a particular order that seems to make sense for the user. And some things like they shouldn't have to import the concept set numbers table and then select it themselves because, well, frankly, that there's only one concept set numbers table, and I don't want the user to have to really worry about that part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to another template version. This is the latest version of this template. And I'm going to first go to the edit template view rather than seeing what it looks like. In this case, I've reordered the column, the parameters, and you can do that by just sort of taking these little boxes and dragging them on. And I've also done something to this concept set numbers. You probably wouldn't notice it from before, but now the icon is a little thumbtack icon. And that's because what I'm saying is I want that parameter to default to that particular table. So I've turned on this default parameter. The other thing that I've done is I've put this particular parameter into a group. And I just typed it out here. So I just said required default. And once it's created, then it's available in the drop down. But you could just just type out required default and say okay. And I'm going to cancel it to go back to it. And what that does is in the form version, putting something in a group puts it under a little drop-down thing here, which is by default hidden. So now the person could change the concept set members table input if they want, but you don't have to, it's sort of hidden away. And that'll be the default if I ever wanted to use this particular template again. So now I'm going to show how this particular template works. I'm going to do that by deleting that input and deleting that thing. And I'm just going to start as though I just loaded in this condition error table. Yeah, this code is in R, but the concepts work, pardon the pun, the same for Python or SQL. So when I go to create a transform from a data set, whether or not you say new transform, or if you sort of say, I want to create a transform from this data set, you get this option to select which kind of thing you want to create, what kind of transform you want to create on it. And I'm going to select templates. And when a transform, when a template is created in the enclave, if it's published, and there's an option to do that when you create your transform, then it will show up as browsable inside of the dropdown down here. So if I wanted to see what templates are sort of published in the enclave, anywhere in the enclave that I happen to have access to, I can browse around and I can say, okay, I happen to create this one in the N3C training area, and then inside of the enclave users group folder, because I presented on this a couple weeks ago, and then inside of the creating code workbooks folder, there are some templates, but for this particular meeting, I created one called just N3C community call, and I want to use the concept set filter demo, and then I'll apply the transformation. Now, when I go to use this particular concept set, it's known that I've done that. I need to tell it which concept ID column I need to match against. The concept set name, I can type in here, pneumonia, yada, 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 as I had before, or you'll notice that I have this drop down of all the different concept sets in here. And so if I start typing, I can actually select one of the concept sets from the drop down. And then I want version 0, and the required default for the concept set members has gotten imported for me. So I don't have to do that because I said that that was a pinned parameter that should come in every time. And now I'm going to preview this. And while it's previewing, I'm going to show you how I got that drop-down thing to work by going to the edit template. In that case, this is the concept set name parameter, right? Rather than having it be a variable of text, I said, I want it to be select. I want to select from a list of things. And in order to do that, you can use what we call object lookup. And if you use object lookup, you can select any of the objects that have been defined inside of the enclave. And if you're not familiar with objects, it's kind of a deep dive, but for right now, we'll just say we want to select a concept set. And a particular concept set has lots of different properties about it. And so what do I want to show on the dropdown? Do I want to show whether it's archived? Do I want to show whether or not it's has a reviewer, has an ID? In this case, I just want the concept set name. And so that's what I did. I changed it from a text to a lookup there, and that gives me the ability to use the dropdown thing here, which is quite a neat feature. Okay, so now I have this table and a nice little reusable bit of code that I can share with others or use in my own projects to quickly filter a table by a concept set. I want to add another transform to this, and it's going to be based on another template that I have developed. And in this one, I'm going to do day span by concept ID. It's a little bit of a contrived example, but what it does is it takes an input table, and if that input table has a start date and an end date column that are of a date type, then I can choose them. So I can say, okay, I want my start date to be the start date, the end date to be the end date, and these are those column inputs like we saw earlier. And what it'll do is it's going to collect all of the different concept types in that particular data set. And it's going to show me a sort of distribution of the durations of those things in a plot. In order to make that happen, though, I also have to tell this particular transform, hey, what's the column that stores those concept IDs. And I'm also going to pick for the title of the plot a name of a concept set. And I'm going to use the same one because this is the pneumonia training one. So that's going to be turned into the title, but I use that little drop down thing. So now I'm going to preview this. And this will show me a nice little plot. While we're waiting for it, I kind of designed these two things to go together, right? Like first, you're working with some sort of a domain table that has a concept of a start and an end date. And then you filter to a particular concept set, and then I plot according to all of the different concepts that are contained in that concept, how many cases are of various durations. And this is some fancy plot code that does that. So I've made these to go together, and what I can do is I can actually turn this into another template which actually contains multiple transforms, which we call a multi-node template. And to show how that works, let me think here. Do I want to start again? Probably. But before I implement that multi-node template, so I've imported this as two different templates, right? But what I can do is I can bring this in as a multi-node template that contains both of them. But I want to note that there's some parameters in both of these that are shared, right? Like both of these templates need to know the concept name that's involved, and they both need to know the column that needs to be worked with that contains the concept IDs of interest. So I'm going to delete these again, and we're going to start from scratch. And I'm going to load in this case, a multi-node template. And you can see sometimes they'll say multi-node in the title, but they'll always have this little icon here. And I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to apply transformation. So again, it's loaded in the concept set members table, which I've pinned and made a default. And now I have, frankly, what I have are two templates and a group. Each template here is the same as the one that I showed earlier. So this is that concept set filter demo template. And this is this day span distribution by concept ID template. But you'll notice that above it says that this template is part of the multi-node template, which is created from this multi-node template thing, and it belongs to a group. And if I want, I can view the group. And when I view the group, it shows me the nodes that are part of the multi-node template as sort of like single node things. And it can even be helpful to color a group of templates like this. View group, I'm going to change these to red. And that sort of makes everything in that template group red. And when I'm in the view group mode, I can see the shared inputs. So the condition era is a shared input of both of those. And the column that I care about is a shared input of both of those. So I'm going to say condition concept ID is the column that's shared between them. And then the concept depth name is also one of those shared inputs. And so I can set those shared inputs inside of the group view. And if I want, I can go back to the individual view to see the inputs for each individual transform. Now, because these are part of a group and they happen to have the shared input defined, if I were to change one of these, so for example, if I were to go to that concept set, you'll notice that it's changed it for both of them because those are linked via that shared input. In creating a multi-node template is really you just start by loading in several single node templates, and then you select them and you right click and then you say create new template, and it does it from both of the source templates to create that group or multi-node template. But what I will do now is I will say actions edit template group, just to give you a quick look at what it looks like if you're editing the template group rather than one of its sort of constituent single node templates. And I can see that the inputs for this particular, what it shows you is it shows you the different individual templates. And then you can define which ones are shared parameters by clicking and saying, hey, this is a shared parameter. And then over here, you say, oh, that other one made a shared parameter for table concept ID column. I'm going to use that shared parameter. And then the shared parameters show up in the multi-node template editor. But the individual ones, the ones that are still only for a specific template, aren't really shown in this particular interface. It's pretty common, I think, in this case to just say, okay, all of the different parameters for all of the different templates will be shared parameters, even if they're only used in one. That way you can see them when you're in your view group view. So that's how you would sort of author code templates and the kinds of things that they can do. I think that there's a lot of really cool user interface stuff that you can do with these. And I will finally, before I go, note that once you've created a template, these are things that can be reused in different areas of the enclave, but it's not easy to make use of a template if it exists in someone else's workspace, because we have these very strong sort of walls between different groups, project workspaces. So that's where the knowledge store comes in. The knowledge store can host several different types of knowledge objects, but it's primarily designed to organize templates. And if you go here, you can browse around the different knowledge artifacts. And there's a brand new one that the logic liaison subgroup has been working on. And you can see, for example, the templates, as well as a README, and in some cases they have example workbooks that utilize those templates. In this case, because I don't have access to the LDS data, I can't get access to the example workbook. So that's a little bit of a limiter right there. But nevertheless, you can click on this. And if you happen to run across a template outside of a code workbook, for example, by clicking on it from the knowledge store, you'll have a chance to see all the different inputs, as well as like all the different subsequent single node templates, as well as the JSON definition for that. But what you can do is you can say actions using code workbook, and that will open a new code workbook with this particular template where you can start filling in the information. All right, there's a couple of cool things that we could talk about templates, but I'm going to stop it for here. We're at the half-hour mark, and we might even have a couple minutes for questions.
Good, thanks a lot, Shawn. Questions? So let me ask you something. So for somebody who is leading or participating in a domain team project, what would be your suggestion is the best way people might actually sort of look to see what's available?
I would definitely check out the knowledge store. Those generally have pretty good documentation, and you may want to use the search in the knowledge store, just sort of browse through it. I think that we might have other opportunities to talk more specifically about the knowledge store, but if you were to change the view here to say see more object knowledge object metrics, one of the cool things about templates in particular is they automatically track which projects they are used in. And so if you were to click on that see more usage metrics, it will list, at some point let's collect a few bits of information, how many different projects use the different templates that are in the knowledge store. And so I can immediately just scroll through here and say, hey, this one looks like it might be very interesting, COVID-19 positive patients with CCI categories, because that's being used by 20 different projects. And so I think that's a really great way to sort of browse around the knowledge store and see which templates are in use broadly across N3C.
So if one say just to choose a topic somewhat at random. So let's say you've got somebody who's interested in acute kidney injury or kidney area that, okay, what now? I mean, obviously people are hard at work on that and have been for a long time. Could you search on objects, template objects that have been used for that group? Let's see what you find.
You can search by keyword, and I believe it'll search all the metadata that's associated with these knowledge objects. And you can search by originating project name. You can search by keyword up here. And then you can also say, if I know that I'm looking for templates that have been created by my team, maybe I have a very big team, I can enter into the originating project and say, I do this sometimes to go to the cohort characterization project, which created a number of good templates that are broadly applicable. And then you can see the ones that are just coming out of that.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so then say we look at the let's see, macro visit data sets.
Yeah. But of course, some things are sort of project specific, and then some of them are generic. There's like a sample persons one that I've created, which can be used just to randomly subsample your tables so that you can speed up your analysis while you're doing your development, and then later on remove it to analyze your entire data set.
So what do you see? Now this is great, and I mean this is something that was always very exciting from the almost the beginning. So what level of reuse are you actually seeing in terms of these? How much are people actually using knowledge store templates? Can you tell? I guess use count.
I'm looking at this just based on what I'm seeing here. I'm not sort of the owner of the knowledge store or the owner of the group. But there seems a decent amount of reuse. And I think that a lot of reuse has to do with the quality of the documentation and the complexity of the template, right? Like things that are not as high quality documented or are complex to use won't see a whole lot of use. But of course, simple, well-documented, reusable things tend to get a lot of good use.
And I assume you can sort these by use count. So people who just wanted to say, okay, what do we think would be really, potentially fairly general would be, oh, this is great. This is okay. I'm pursuing this in some sense just to give people a feeling as to how this stuff could be used, because I'm sure that one of the issues is you've got the scientist types and then the engineer developer types in a team, and just sort of to kind of encourage communication. So certainly template count or use count is going to be important. What is a template use count, right? And then template
by project word. So if there's a project which uses a template 10 times, it'll be included 10 times here.
Right. So select critical visits, obviously common to lots of things, and you can see that it's very common. It's COVID-19 positive patients, obviously it's the topic of the whole consortium, so that makes sense. BMI template, that's nice, that's 15. Oh, this is exciting. So basically what we're seeing is, I mean, the thing is working. It's very cool that the things that we thought would be commonly used, BMI is a good example. Obviously, does a patient has a patient had COVID? This is used a lot. So so this is impressive. So good. Other questions or thought? Let's see. If some project has some problem because they don't know, can they get help? I didn't actually quite understand that.
Oh, I like that question.
Okay, I think the question is, can you
we
get
have
help?
a variety of help venues. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have open office hours. Todd and myself are usually there, and we can answer questions or point you to the direction. That's Tuesday, Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and that's on the N3C calendar. And then on Fridays, we have a new option, the Enclave User Group. That's Fridays at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And every week we have somebody come and present some topic, sort of a methods, or we had one on how to do patient cohort matching with our Match It package with Sarah Ratcliffe. That was really cool. We've had people talking about the knowledge store, talking about these templates. Like I said, this is actually a repurpose of a presentation I gave there a couple weeks ago. So definitely check out those two options, and they're both on the calendar.
Okay, Shawn, so thanks a lot. This was great. Let me just make one last sort of meta comment, because there were a lot of really great details here that perhaps some of the less technically oriented people wouldn't necessarily follow. But to me, sort of a really key take home is that there's software where basically if you're leading or co-leading or involved in leading a project as a science person, and you say, okay, are we really reinventing the wheel? Then you can look and see, okay, in general, what are some of the problems that other domain teams have tackled and where is their code? And then you can go to your engineering folks and say, look, you know, are we reinventing the wheel or reusing things? Does that make sense, Shawn? I don't want to put words in your mouth. I guess I kind of did. You can refute them.
Good by me.
Okay. All right, Ken. Honest broker agreement. Let's interested to hear all about it.
Okay, so can you all see my screen? Can you hear me? Shawn, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Ken.
We can hear you.
Okay, so this is something that's coming to you all very soon, at probably the end of this week or hopefully middle of next week, that we're going to try to get the honest, we've actually changed the name of it. It's called Linkage Honest Broker Agreement or PPRL hashing agreement out to the community. And I wanted to go over this. I'll be talking about this a lot because we just want to make sure that this gets communicated to the community in general. So this technology that I'm going to talk about is basically to do three things. It's to do patient deduplication. It's to do multimodal data analytics, so basically combining different types of data. And it's to do cohort discovery. And I just want to make sure that I distinguish between cohort discovery and re-identification. This is cohort discovery. It's like Trinetics. It's not re-identifying patients. It is truly cohort discovery. So how many people in your system have a certain illness or phenotype, though they don't know who they are. So let's talk about this is a pretty powerful technology. We're going to be asking sites to sign an addendum to the existing data transfer agreement. Again, it's called the Linkage Honest Broker Agreement. And what I want the community to be able to take home and what I want this community today to help share with anybody who asks, because this is going to be a big leap to educate everybody on what this technology is that participation in this is voluntary. Only, and I can't say this enough, I'll say it a dozen times, only data contributors, so sites who give the data have access to and they control all PHI, PII. Participation is not all or none in this work, meaning that, like I said before, this is for doing deduplication, linkage of different types of data, and cohort discovery. You can participate in either or cohort discovery, either or multiple data set linkage. However, if you do sign the agreement, you are agreeing to participate in deduplication. And the reason we made that a minimum is because we think it improves the science for everybody. Sites control and can control what they participate in. So if you change your mind, that's totally fine. The Linkage Honest Broker, which in this case is Regenstrife, has no PHI, no PII. I said this before, and they are bound by the governance of the CTSA N3C community. Also, using this PPRL is not for the purpose of administrative or performance purposes. It's for doing research, scientific research. So let's just make sure we understand what deduplication is. This is a typical example. I show this over and over again. We have John Smith spelled with an H who went to the UNC ICU, and we have John Smith spelled without an H who went to Duke for his primary care provider. It turns out that it's the same person. When Duke sends in the number, even though it's the same person, they'll have a different number. In this example, it's 456, and UNC sent in their number 123. I won't get into the details of it, but there's a greater than 90% chance that the honest data broker or the honest linkage broker will be able to say that both 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6 are in fact the same person. Again, they only know they're the same person. They don't know who they are. So they would say to N3C, both of these people are the same, and N3C then would adjudicate those two records. The second example is what I was talking about before, linking multiple data sets. This is, I'm showing, we are actively working on linking images from TCIA from Arkansas. Fred Pryor and Stony Brook, Joel Saltz are leading this effort. And this is the ability to link images to the N3C record. There's been some recent literature out that said, you know, predictive models with multiple data types obviously increase the value of your predictive models. One paper that we recently looked at says, you know, go from the high 70s, the high 60s to the high 90s if you have imaging and N3C data on whether you can predict mortality on somebody who has COVID. And the final thing is the cohort discovery. Again, this is, you are an investigator in this example. Let's say you did a query and you found 10,000 people in N3C that had pneumonia that was treated with azithromycin and COVID. You could go to the honest broker and say, here are these 10,000 people. And for sites that had agreed to it, and that's important, voluntary, that they will be contacted by the broker and say, I don't know who these people are, but number 1, 2, 3, 10, 7, 8, 22, 52 are people we're interested in recruiting. If you're interested in participating in a study, you can contact them with your local rules. So if you contact them, if your institution uses a phone or a letter or a PCP or however you do, that'll be up to you. And again, participation is up to you, and you decide if you de-identify them and find out that people are. So I want to talk about understanding the difference between different data types. So the N3C community, as I'm sure some of you already know, have brought in what we call class 3 and 4 data types. This is a classification system that Dave Eichmann put together, and it's been incredibly valuable. So in brief, class 3 and 4 are low risk for identification. And so if you get DAC approval for even de-identified data sets, you don't need a letter of determination because those data sets are available for you as just a resource. But we're talking about two new different classes, class 0 and class 2. So on purpose, we were staging these in. And so now we're really focused on class 2, and then probably in a few months, we'll focus on class 0. Class 1, which leads to identification, is never allowed in N3C. So class 2 means I'm using this fancy technology, the PPRL. It means the data is going to need a DAC approval, like it has for LDS, but it automatically, even if you apply for de-identified in this case, you would still need DAC approval and a letter of determination. But now you see there's a check under the column called Linkage Honest Broker Agreement. So if your institution has agreed to the Linkage Honest Broker Agreement, then your data will be incorporated in this study. So on the right, I've shown the new DUR, and it will show you data that's available for data that's available as class 2 that are now that you can request. Let me say that again. So I'm putting in a study using my DUR, and I want to use mortality data. It is class 2. That means it's got a PPRL on it. It means it will require determination. It will also require, if your institution wants to have its data used, that's important, not you use it. If they want to have it used, they will have to sign this linkage broker agreement. Class 0, and we're not going to get to this quite yet, like I said, this is coming in a few months, is very much like class 2. It's using the PPRL technology, but unlike class 2, where mortality will be inside of N3C. Class 0 is combining two different enclaves. So think of combining NHLBI biodata catalyst with N3C NCATS data, or imaging data from Midrick out of Chicago. In that case, you'll hear about this concept called an Interconnect Agreement. So yet another requirement that the enclaves have made an agreement with each other. Back to what I was saying at the beginning, it's not an all or nothing. It's voluntary, no penalty if you don't want to participate. However, if you do sign, you are signing for two big classes: the ability to link data and or the ability to participate in cohort discovery. If Site 1, and let's say it's UNC, says we are not going to allow any linkage data, their data that came with their site identifier will be excluded from all analysis with linkage. Same thing with cohort discovery. If you don't participate, you will never be contacted by the honest broker because you said, I don't want to participate in it. Personally, my plug is, I'm not sure why you wouldn't, because it's basically saying we want to bring a study to your site, which would be money and money and new investigation. But that certainly, it's just want to make sure it's voluntary. So the participation is a little bit more detailed than yes, I want to be part of linkage, or no, I don't. It's clustered in the data type. So in this case, and I'll continue to pick on UNC and Duke, and that's the yellow line here. IUNC have decided not, Site 1, to participate in image linkage. But Duke, let's say Site 2, said we will. So if an investigator got access to N3C data and we're going to link images, the data that would be included in their set would include Duke data, their site, but not UNC data. And this grid or lookup table will be controlled by the data contributing institutions. So in the picture I have here, I'm showing all the sites, so you could see UNC and Duke and Texas and da-da-da-da. When you go to this, you will only see your site. It's really not, it's not appropriate to show what Duke is doing to UNC, but for the slides, I thought it would be better to have it as a grid. In fact, you will only see your columns. So I want to talk to you about preparatory to research. Actually, preparatory research. This is just a little bit different concept. The ability for you as an investigator, or for the NIH, or for whomever we as a governance team decides to allow, to see if a study is viable, meaning you only are getting aggregate answers, is open to anybody who brings back a query of greater than 20. In essence, we will allow people to search and say how many people in N3C have images also. And if the number comes back more than 20, they can see that there's 20. They won't know the sites, they won't know anything about the people, but we feel that it's important that people be able to prepare for studies by knowing if there's a greater power. And since we're not really showing anything that's private, we don't feel like that should be hidden from people to use. So that I just want to let people know just a little bit of it, that we want that to be available to the community. Okay, so what does this take to do this? And this is where I'm starting asking for your help. If you are a site, and I'm using mortality data as the example, soon from NCATS, you will get a copy of a linkage honest broker agreement. This is an addendum to your data transfer agreement. And like I said, this is the agreement that you're signing that's saying, I will participate, and that commits me just to deduplication. You can go in again later and say yes or no to linkage and cohort discovery, but that's the minimum. Then you're going to be asked by Datavant to sign a license. We're contracting with them. There's no cost, but you as an institution have to sign this agreement to get this piece of software because it's a private company. And so I just don't want people to be surprised that there's two things you're signing. And if your institutional official comes to you and says, what the heck is this? Say, oh, this is the software that puts the number, the PPRL, on our data. So once you've signed these agreements, and there will be people here from Regan Stripe to answer questions about the Honest Broker Agreement, and people that have been who are on board to help you with implementing the PPRL software, installing it, explaining how this works. And by the way, if you're a Preparatory site, you've already got this there, so some of those folks will be familiar with it. There will be people to answer your questions. So after you sign these two agreements, you're really sending the data payload to N3C that you're doing now. The only thing new is you're adding this number, this PPRL. And in this slide set, there's a demo here, and you can click on the demo. The slides will be available, and you can see it lays down about 1 million PPRLs in 30 minutes. It's extremely fast. So this is not a big lift, but you'll also be doing one extra thing. You're going to be sending the PPRL number, again, no PHI, to the Honest Broker because they're the matching service. So you're basically going to continue what you do now, send the payload to N3C, to the secure FTP site. In addition, you will send a file with these hashes to Regan Stripe, the Honest Broker. NCATS, us, will be responsible for modifying the IRB, which includes new data, in this case, mortality. We will, the harmonization team will harmonize the data that comes in. So we're going to be bringing in viral variants, we're bringing in mortality, we're bringing in CMS, we're bringing in images. Those are the 4 different new level 2 data sets we're bringing in. We will be responsible for harmonizing so they're available like the data is in N3C. And then of course, we've got to modify the DAC, that drop-down menu so you know you can pick your data. On last Friday, on the governance call, or the Friday before, excuse me, on the governance call, we proposed the governance agreement. It has been up on a Google Drive looking for comments for the last week, maybe 9-10 days now. We're looking for comments because this is the governance that obviously how we are going to, as a community, decide, how things are done, and we would love your comments on it. And it also includes a copy of the linkage harmonization draft that'll still having comments made. And with that, I'm going to stop. And really, I'm asking the team that just to let you know that this is coming because we're going to need your help in getting sites to sign up, because you can't find the mortality data unless your data also has the PPRL, right? It needs both pieces. So I know that was a lot in just a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
So Ken, I have a question, which people might have. So in terms of the interaction with the institutional IRBs, so you mentioned getting the IRB to agree to use of mortality data or imaging data or whatever it happens to be. Now, is there going to be a template that sites will then present to their IRBs and say, okay, you've got the Hopkins IRB, as the master IRB, but now we need to include X, Y, Z. So how cookie cutter do you think this can be?
I think, Joel, I'm hoping it's going to be very cookie cutter. You're really doing what you did before when you were applying for a limited data set, but now you need to tell your IRB, I am now combining this with mortality data or viral variant data, because some IRBs are sensitive that when you're combining different data types that they want to, give it extra scrutiny. There's really nothing more than informing them what you're doing. The only other extra thing is because the class 2 and 3 are a little bit more sensitive, where in 3 and 4 you could get to those data sets if you didn't need limited data set, you could get to those. They were just open for free. As soon as you pick one of these, it will require that in the DUR, the letter is uploaded. So it shouldn't be that much different from what.
So, but there are two steps to this, or at least I'm sure there are multiple steps, but in terms of the interaction with the IRB, there's the agreement that essentially where each individual IRB says, okay, the Hopkins IRB is the IRB of record. And then there's the individual protocol that is submitted to the local IRB that says, I want to do study XYZ. So I understand what you're saying is that say we want to use mortality data, then in a study, then say the long COVID study or the kidney study or whatever would have an amendment saying, okay, we want to use mortality data. Does the master agreement where each institution is, I mean, I know not all institutions do, but most of us refer to the
No, there's nothing to do on that side, Joel. That's
so it's only in particular the specific project IRB.
It's only the project IRB.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So you don't have to do anything else for Johns Hopkins or for your, for a kind of greater institutional move. It's really the local study, the DUR that you're working on.
Okay, great. And John Buse actually put in a question that's relevant to this. I think you will need to provide language to IRB about how you could end up with imperfect mortality data. I suspect that it could be re-identified. Okay, I'm not. So what I gather there's a concern that including mortality data could be a re-identification risk. Is that the sense of this? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. You use the word imperfect. Everything's more complicated than we've talked of, of course, and everything, but we actually are getting mortality data from 3 different sources, and it will update itself over time. There will be a level of confidence. I mean, if all 3, Mr. Doe has passed away, we're relatively confident that it's correct. You as an investigator will see how many sources are backing up the fact that this person was marked as having passed away. So it will be up to you as an investigator to say, well, I won't trust this data until I've got 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3. So it's really, it ends up within the OMOP model, there is a mortality field. That field won't be filled with the 3 sets because it's only 1 field. Instead, it'll be a flag to a new table that will say, this is where the data came from. It came from source 1, 2, or 3.
Great. Okay, and I guess there's another question from Johanna Lumba. The patient is seen at 2 sites and both agree to linkage. Will EHR records be joined? If so, how will we know which OMOP data is coming from each site and associated data model? Right now, each patient has 1 data partner ID and the patient and the person table. Okay.
So that's a really, I think I understand your question, Joanna. It's actually pretty complicated, isn't it? Because if Mr. Doe is at one institution, he's on Zoloft, let's say 50 milligrams, and at Duke, and then on UNC, he's on the same medicine, 100 milligrams. We don't actually know. So actually, each of the data sets have to be combined with its own rules. If medicines are not duplicative, they're combined. They'll be labeled that they came from different institutions. We can't tell you which institution, so they'll just have a number on them. So you will know that the data that there was a combined person, that it came from different places, 1, 2, 3, or 4, but I won't be able to tell you where it came from because we are not allowed to do that. So it's not I think your point is a good one. It's not perfect, but we will do our best to combine them so you know that instead of having 2 people with this constellation of things, it's just 1 person. I think
Yeah, no, that's an interesting, I see it now. That is interesting, and it's an interesting question as to who will be charged with generating the information that has the appropriate degree trade-off of convenience and disambiguation, because
Yes.
that's a really good question. Okay, one last thing, because we're over time. There was an old question from Mary Saltz, who has accords to what set of code, and Shawn said, "Hey Mary, would you mind asking the Q&A clarifying what you mean by that?" I think it's who has the sort of, in some sense, ownership.
Who's that for?
I think that was for Shawn.
Do we mean ownership of the templates or of the concept sets? In any case, concept sets are sort of a public good. They exist in a public location, so anyone in the enclave should be able to get access to the concept sets. Templates exist within project workspaces, so they're private until they are submitted to the knowledge store, and then they are public.
And there's currently no notion of proprietary templates where somebody can say, well, this is a template and I can give them to some people, but not others. It's once it's a template, at least for purposes of this consortium, it's in the knowledge store. Anybody get it?
You can generate a template and share it only with people in the same project where the template lives by just not submitting it to the knowledge store. Though obviously, if you're developing a really cool template that other projects would want to use, you should probably share it.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're 4 minutes over. So in the interest of not getting a reputation for running late later, let's wrap it up. So thanks, Shawn and Ken, and I think this was a lot of interesting presentation discussion. So thanks. Have a good week,
everybody.
Bye-bye.